The night over the grasslands was heavy with silence, broken only by the wind brushing the tall stalks. Then it came, a cry, sharp and raw, cutting through the darkness. Thomas Grant jolted from his wooden porch, but it was Rex who moved first. The German shepherd, trained and disciplined, surged forward with urgency, hackles raised but tail rigid with purpose. His deep bark echoed like a warning to something unseen. Thomas grabbed a lantern and followed, heart pounding, the sound of his boots sinking into soft earth. The cry came again, weaker this time, muffled by distance. Rex stopped abruptly near the tree line, nose pressed to the ground, body stiff. His gaze lifted, meeting Thomas's eyes with a demand that needed no words. Whatever lay ahead was not routine. This was desperation, the kind that turned the night into a battlefield between life and death. The lantern's glow swept across broken grass and a trail of dark stains shimmering wet under the moonlight. Then Thomas saw it, a leopard cub, ribs etched beneath thin fur, one paw swollen and bleeding. Its chest rose in frantic bursts, eyes wide, darting between the man and the looming shadow of Rex. Instinct should have driven the dog to bark, to lunge, to push the predator away. But Rex did none of those things. He stood over the cub like a sentinel, body rigid yet protective, tail lowered but steady. Thomas froze, struck by the impossible image before him, predator and guardian locked in fragile silence. The cub whimpered again, lifting its head weakly before collapsing into the dirt. Rex nudged it with his nose, then looked at Thomas, ears tilted back. The message was undeniable. This life was not prey. It was a plea for help.
Thomas knelt slowly, his knees brushing the blood-dampened grass, lantern shaking in his hand. The cub trembled, trying to crawl but sinking with every motion, claws dragging across the earth. Its spotted coat was dulled with dirt, its body too small for the wild world it had been left to face. Rex did not move away. Instead, the shepherd lowered his head, nose brushing close enough to share breath with the broken creature. Thomas reached forward, hesitated, then slid his arms beneath the frail frame. The cub's body was burning hot with fever, heart racing like a trapped bird. For a moment, Thomas felt the wildness pulse against his chest, a reminder that this was no pet, no tame being. And yet, as he rose with the weight in his arms, the cub curled against him, eyes closing as if surrendering to safety. Blood stained the sleeve of Thomas's worn jacket as he carried the cub toward his house. Rex padded alongside, silent but unrelenting, his eyes fixed on the trembling body. The night air hung heavy with the scent of iron and dust. Inside, Thomas laid the cub on an old wool blanket near the hearth. The leopard shivered, breaths shallow, ears twitching at every sound. Rex settled beside it immediately, lowering his chest to the floor until their bodies touched. The cub whimpered, shifting closer, pressing its spotted head against Rex's flank. Thomas stared in disbelief. His disciplined canine, trained to confront danger, was offering warmth to the very creature nature had marked as an enemy. In that moment, the room felt altered, boundaries erased. Predator and protector shared the same space, and Thomas realized he was standing at the edge of something both impossible and dangerous.
The first night was restless. The cub whimpered in its sleep, twitching as though chased by nightmares. Rex remained close, nudging gently each time the animal stirred. Hours slipped away, the fire dimming, yet the shepherd never closed his eyes. At dawn, Thomas prepared fresh scraps of meat, setting them carefully before the leopard. Its nostrils flared, body tensed. Then it ate with desperate gulps, glancing between every bite. Rex did not contest. He sat quietly, gaze fixed, as if granting permission. When the meal was finished, the cub shifted its weight until its head rested on Rex's broad paw. Thomas caught his breath, the sight cutting deeper than words. This was not an accident. The dog had chosen. Against instinct, against every lesson of the wild, Rex had extended loyalty to something meant to be his rival, and Thomas understood. The story had only begun. Days turned into weeks, and the cub, named Shadow by Thomas, began to regain strength. Its coat gleamed with new life, eyes brighter though still carrying unease. Rex remained its constant shadow, circling protectively, guiding each hesitant step. Shadow followed him as though tethered by invisible thread, imitating his movements, pausing when Rex paused, rising when he rose. Thomas watched, conflicted, torn between awe and dread. At night, Shadow whimpered less, often curling into Rex's side, their breaths falling into perfect rhythm. Each sunrise painted a picture Thomas could barely comprehend, his trained guardian sharing water, food, and rest with a predator that one day might turn. But each time doubt crept in, he would see Shadow pressing its head into Rex's chest, trusting him more deeply than instinct allowed. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a reminder that nature's patience had limits.
Months passed, and Shadow's body grew sleek and powerful. Muscles rippled beneath spotted fur, paws heavier, claws sharper. Rex, older now, bore the signs of strain, limps after long walks, slower responses, but his loyalty never wavered. They played together in the fields, rolling, chasing, a blur of fur and joy. Yet Thomas began noticing the subtle differences. Shadow's eyes lingered on the horizon longer, drawn to the wild distance. Sometimes he would freeze, nostrils flaring, body tense, as though hearing calls no one else could. Rex would nudge him, pulling him back into play, but Thomas felt the shift. The bond was real, undeniable, but it trembled under the weight of instinct rising. Each night, Thomas stood at the window watching them sleep. Dog and leopard curled like brothers. And every night, he asked himself the same question: how long could this last? The first sign of dread came one morning when Thomas found a trail near the fence. Blood stained the grass, dragged in uneven lines, leading to the half-eaten carcass of an antelope. Its throat was torn, body marked by claws. Shadow stood nearby, chest heaving, eyes bright with a fire Thomas had not yet seen. Rex sat beside him, silent, but his ears were back, his tail rigid, a low vibration trembling in his chest. Thomas froze, staring at the scene, denial wrestling with truth. He wanted to believe the kill was coincidence, another predator passing through. But Shadow's muzzle glistened red, and his growl carried pride, not fear. Rex did not attack, but his body leaned slightly forward, tension coiling in his muscles. It was the first time Thomas realized loyalty and instinct were colliding, and only one would survive.
Shadow grew restless after the antelope incident. He paced along the fence line, tail twitching, muscles rolling with energy too large for the small home. At night, his low calls echoed against the trees, a haunting sound Thomas had never heard before. Rex responded by pressing closer, curling tightly against him as though to keep him grounded. But even then, Thomas noticed the shepherd's body stiffen whenever Shadow stirred. The balance had shifted. What had once been play now edged toward something primal. One evening, Erica arrived, her voice trembling as she stood on the porch. She saw the marks on Shadow's coat, the hunger in his eyes, and whispered to her father that this was no longer safe. Thomas turned away, unable to answer. Inside, Rex lay with Shadow pressed against his chest, as if daring the world to tear them apart. The night stretched long, stars muted by passing clouds. Thomas sat by the window, hands folded, eyes fixed on the two shapes curled together on the rug. Rex, loyal and scarred, rested with steady breath. Shadow, larger now, draped across him like a sibling, muzzle buried in fur. It should have been a picture of peace, but Thomas's chest burned with unease. He could not silence the words his daughter had spoken, nor the warning carved in blood on the antelope's throat. Yet when he looked again, all he saw was trust. Pure, unshaken, as Shadow stirred and Rex adjusted to shield him. Thomas whispered into the silence, knowing neither animal could understand, yet needing to say it. "One day, I will lose one of you." And with that thought, the darkness pressed heavier, a promise of sorrow waiting beyond the dawn.
Morning light spilled over the grasslands as Thomas stepped outside with coffee in hand. The air was still, carrying only the faint calls of distant birds. In the field, Rex limped slightly, but still chased after Shadow, who now towered over him. Their play was different, faster, sharper, filled with a force Thomas had not seen before. The leopard's leaps were powerful, claws grazing the shepherd's back in bursts of instinct. Rex never retaliated, never raised his teeth, only absorbed the blows and pressed back with patience. Thomas tried to smile, but his chest tightened. His camera captured the scene, frame after frame of loyalty and danger wrapped together. Later, when he looked back at the images, he could not decide if they showed love or warning. Each click of the shutter felt like a countdown, each photograph a reminder that this bond was borrowed time. Rex began showing the weight of age and injury. His once commanding stride shortened, favoring an old scar on his hind leg, while Shadow's body grew fluid, coiled with strength. When they ate, Rex waited longer, letting Shadow take the first share, his dark eyes softened but weary. Thomas divided food carefully, equal portions, but Shadow's muzzle always finished first, teeth sharper, jaw heavier. The shepherd did not fight, simply nudged what remained, an unspoken surrender. Nights grew heavier with silence. Sometimes Thomas woke to the sound of Shadow pacing, claws clicking against the wooden floor. Rex followed, nose nudging, guiding him back to rest. But even Thomas saw the tremor in Rex's shoulders each time. This was no longer the cub he had rescued. This was a predator sharpening itself in the shadows of a home never meant to hold it.
Erica returned one weekend, her voice carrying the sharpness Thomas feared. She watched as Shadow padded across the yard, shoulders rippling, tail swaying like a predator ready to strike. She whispered that her father was blind, that Rex's loyalty would not be enough. Her eyes brimmed with both fear and grief as she warned him, "You cannot tame hunger, Dad. It will end in blood." Thomas turned away, unwilling to let the words pierce what his heart had already suspected. Inside, Rex and Shadow curled together, their bodies pressed close in silence. Erica stood in the doorway, frozen by the sight, dog and leopard appearing as brothers, but shadowed by something inevitable. She left with tears staining her cheeks, her warning left hanging in the air. The house fell quiet, but Thomas knew she was right. He just couldn't decide which truth he feared more, losing Shadow or losing Rex. The following days bled into one another, each carrying tension Thomas could no longer ignore. He watched as Rex carried his bowl to Shadow, gently pushing it closer with his nose, a gesture of submission disguised as kindness. The leopard devoured the meat quickly, powerful jaws crushing bones that Rex once handled with ease. The shepherd stepped back each time, tail wagging faintly, still loyal. Thomas's hands trembled when he set food down now. The balance had shifted in silence, and he was powerless to reverse it. At night, Thomas stood at the window, watching the two shapes pressed close by the fire. They looked inseparable, two lives bound as one, yet Thomas felt only dread. Their bond was undeniable, but its foundation had cracked. What once looked like brotherhood now looked like a trap, one neither animal could escape without loss. One late evening, Thomas found Shadow perched on the fence post, eyes locked on the horizon. The moonlight carved his silhouette, strong and untamed. He did not move when Thomas called softly, only flicked his tail and sniffed the wind. The cub was gone. In his place stood a young predator, drawn by instincts the house could not hold. Rex limped into the yard, tail wagging, circling until Shadow climbed back down. They pressed noses briefly before retreating to their rug. Yet Thomas had seen the look in the leopard's eyes. Hunger, yearning, a call older than any bond. He lay awake until dawn, listening to Shadow's restless breaths and Rex's occasional whines. The walls no longer felt protective. They felt thin, like paper shielding a storm. The home Thomas had built for safety was now the place where tragedy waited, closer each night. The morning brought confirmation Thomas dreaded. Near the outer field, blood streaked the grass, dragging toward a broken fence post. An antelope lay lifeless, throat torn, body ravaged with fresh wounds. The air reeked of iron, and flies already circled. Thomas froze as he spotted paw prints pressed deep into the mud, larger, heavier than before. He turned, and there stood Shadow, muzzle damp, eyes burning with something primal. Behind him, Rex approached, tail stiff, hackles faintly raised. The shepherd's gaze flicked from the carcass to the leopard, body trembling, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Shadow did not flinch. He only lowered his head, licking the blood from his whiskers, before padding past Thomas into the yard. It was no longer suspicion, it was truth. The predator had awakened, and Rex, loyal as he was, had no choice but to face it.
From that day, Rex grew more watchful. He no longer followed Shadow's every step with wagging ease. His ears stayed back, tail low, eyes sharp. When Shadow circled the yard, Rex circled too. Not in play, but in quiet defense. Thomas noticed the change in posture. The shepherd's muscles coiled tighter, his bark deeper, but his loyalty unbroken. He shadowed the leopard's movements, pressing his body between Shadow and the open fields, as though he could hold back the pull of the wild with sheer devotion. Shadow responded with brief snarls, flashes of teeth that faded quickly, but Thomas saw the lines drawn. The bond that had seemed eternal was bending under pressure. Each night, the shepherd lay close, still guarding the predator he should have feared. But Thomas knew this was not peace. It was a fragile silence. And silence always breaks. Dr. Nora Ray arrived one evening, summoned by Thomas's trembling calls. She examined Shadow from a distance, eyes narrowed at the muscles tightening beneath spotted fur, the sharpness in his gaze. Her voice carried no hesitation as she told Thomas the truth. No amount of care could erase what ran in the leopard's blood. Instinct was not sickness, it was nature, and nature always wins. Thomas swallowed hard, Rex lying pressed against Shadow on the rug, ears twitching at Nora's voice. The vet's tone softened only slightly as she added, "Love can't undo instinct, it only delays it. Be ready." Then she left, her warning lingering like smoke in the air. That night Thomas sat awake, watching Rex's chest rise and fall beside the predator's. His daughter's words, the vet's warning, they were all the same echo, pointing toward the same inevitable end.
The house grew colder, though the fire burned as always. Shadow no longer purred against Rex in contentment. Instead, his breathing carried a restless rhythm, his tail twitching even in sleep. Rex pressed closer, curling into him as if to hold him steady, to chain him to the life they had built. Thomas could not look away, his heart aching with both love and fear. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wild things, the kind that stirred Shadow awake with sudden jerks. Each night felt like borrowed time, and Thomas whispered prayers he no longer believed in. The man saw his shepherd's body stiffen at every stir, saw Shadow's claws stretch reflexively in dreams. Two hearts beat side by side, but one carried hunger the other could never match. Each sunrise brought relief, but also dread. The question was no longer if, but when. On a dim morning, Thomas sat on the porch, head in his hands, watching the yard before him. Rex stood guard, posture low but determined, eyes fixed on Shadow. The leopard padded slowly across the grass, movement sleek, predatory, no longer resembling the cub they had saved. He paused, lifted his head, and stared into the open fields beyond the fence. For a long moment, neither dog nor leopard moved. Then, Shadow turned back and pressed briefly against Rex's shoulder, almost as if remembering what bound them. But when he pulled away, Thomas caught the flicker in his eyes, something wild, unreachable. He whispered to himself words he could not speak aloud. "One day I will lose one of you." The weight of inevitability hung heavy in his chest. The house was silent, but the storm was already circling just beyond the horizon.
Shadow's size was now undeniable. He moved like a shadow across the grass, muscles rippling, tail low, eyes sharp. Rex, limping after an old scar, never gave ground. He followed the leopard's every step, no longer a playful companion, but a sentinel braced for conflict. Thomas watched from the porch, coffee untouched, his heart a stone in his chest. Shadow leapt effortlessly to a boulder near the fence, surveying the land like a king. Rex barked once, sharp and commanding, as if reminding him of boundaries. For a moment, predator and protector locked eyes. The air between them throbbed with tension, silent but dangerous. Shadow finally jumped down, brushing past Rex, their bodies colliding with force. No growls, no fight, just silence. But Thomas saw it clearly. The day was coming when silence would shatter, and love would not be enough to stop blood. The shepherd's body carried the weight of years, yet he never allowed distance. When Shadow prowled near the fence, Rex pressed against him, ears flat, eyes hard, tail stiff. His devotion burned through every limp, every eek. But Thomas saw what Rex would not admit. The predator no longer looked back with softness. Shadow's gaze lingered on the horizon, nostrils flaring with the scent of wild prey. Each night, his pacing grew sharper, restless energy shaking the small home to its core. Thomas whispered that he could not choose between them, that fate would decide for him. Rex pressed close to his side, head bowed against his knee, loyal as ever. Outside, Shadow growled softly at something unseen in the fields. The sound chilled Thomas's spine. It wasn't a warning, it was hunger. Hunger that no walls, no love, no bond could contain.
The fields bore more signs of intrusion. Another carcass was found near the fence line, its throat torn, ribs cracked open. The air reeked of death, and Thomas's stomach twisted as he crouched near the remains. Shadow stood not far, chest heaving, whiskers damp with blood he had not tried to hide. Rex barked sharply, stepping between the leopard and the house, a trembling growl vibrating through his chest. For the first time, Shadow hissed low, tail lashing, eyes narrowing with cold defiance. It lasted only seconds before the leopard turned away, padding back toward the shade of the trees. But Thomas's hands shook, dirt crumbling through his fingers. The lines had blurred beyond repair. Predator and protector had reached a silent battlefield, and the ground beneath them was already stained.
It was no longer a question of loyalty. It was a countdown to ruin. Erica returned, her voice breaking as she confronted her father on the porch. She begged him to see what was unfolding, that Shadow was no longer the cub Rex had saved, but a predator circling the edge of their lives. Her hands trembled as she warned him that if he refused to choose, the choice would be made for him in blood. Thomas turned away, staring at the fields where Rex lay beside Shadow, bodies pressed close, the illusion of peace. His chest burned with love and denial, a man unwilling to sever the fragile bond that had carried them this far. Erica's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "If you don't let go, you'll lose them both." She left with her words lingering in the air like a curse. And Thomas knew she was right. He just didn't know which fate would break him more.
The days blurred together in heavy silence. Thomas fed them carefully, dividing meat with shaking hands. Rex waited, as always, pressing his nose to Shadow's bowl, giving before taking. Shadow devoured his share quickly, jaws snapping, tail lashing, his body trembling with tension Thomas could not name. At night, Thomas heard Rex whine softly, pressing closer to the leopard, as though shielding him from the wildness clawing at his chest. But even then, Thomas saw the flicker in Shadow's eyes, the pull of instinct too strong to deny. Each morning he woke with dread. His daughter's warning haunted him. His vet's words echoed like prophecy. His heart knew what his mind refused to accept. Love could not erase instinct. Each step, each breath, each meal felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground would give way but unable to move. It happened at dawn. The cry of a goat tore through the morning air, sharp and desperate. Thomas bolted from the porch, heart racing, and saw Shadow leaping toward the fence where the animal thrashed in panic. Muscles coiled, claws unsheathed, hunger blazing in his eyes. But before Shadow could strike, Rex launched himself forward, teeth bared, body colliding with the leopard in a burst of fury. The art erupted with sound, snarls, growls, claws scraping earth, teeth sinking into flesh. Thomas froze, unable to move, horror rooting him in place. This was not play, this was war, silent warnings broken, instincts unleashed. Shadow slashed with claws that carved deep. Rex lunged, jaws clamping tight, refusing to yield. Blood sprayed across the grass as predator and protector collided in a storm of violence. And Thomas knew in that instant, the bond had finally shattered.
The fight was brutal, primal, unstoppable. Shadow roared, body twisting, claws tearing into Rex's chest. The shepherd's growls rose like thunder, teeth digging deep into the leopard's shoulder, refusing to let go. They rolled across the yard, earth tearing beneath them, blood staining the grass. Thomas cried out, but his voice was drowned by the savagery unfolding before him. Every strike, every bite was the collision of love and instinct, brotherhood undone in a heartbeat. Rex staggered, his body weakening, but still he lunged, still he fought, still he placed himself between Shadow and the home they shared. Shadow struck again, claws sinking deep, and Rex's cry split the air, sharp and agonizing. For the first time, the leopard broke free, standing tall, chest heaving, muzzle dripping red. Rex lay on the ground, trembling, eyes locked on him with both love and defiance. Blood spread quickly across the grass, seeping into Rex's thick fur. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one weaker than the last. Shadow stood frozen, eyes wild, the reality of what he had done flickering in his gaze. For a heartbeat, predator and protector stared at one another, silence choking the air. Then, Shadow turned, tail low, and disappeared through the fence, vanishing into the wild from which he came. Thomas dropped to his knees, cradling Rex against him, hands trembling as they pressed against wounds too deep to close.
The shepherd's eyes met his master's, filled not with fear, but with a loyalty that had never wavered. Blood stained Thomas's clothes, soaking his skin as he whispered apologies into the night. Rex's tail thumped once against the earth, a final gesture of love, before stillness claimed his body forever.
The yard was silent now, the grass painted in red, the echo of snarls still ringing in Thomas's ears. He sat, cradling Rex, rocking slightly as though he could will life back into the body that had protected him for years. Tears blurred his vision, dripping onto the shepherd's fur, mingling with blood. The house behind him felt hollow, stripped of its heart. He whispered words he could not finish, promises broken by fate. In the distance, a leopard's cry carried across the fields, low and haunting, a reminder of what had been lost. Shadow had fled, but his presence lingered in every broken breath. Thomas clutched Rex's collar in his hand, pressing it to his chest. The weight of grief crushed him, heavier than any silence he had ever known. In his arms lay loyalty's price, and it was more than he could bear. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the porch. The house stood quiet, its heart silenced forever. Rex's collar rested on the step, gleaming faintly in the light, the only trace of the guardian who had given everything. Thomas sat in stillness, his eyes empty, his world hollow. From the distance came a sound, the deep, resonant roar of a leopard echoing through the valley. It was not a call of triumph, nor of sorrow, but of inevitability. Shadow had returned to the wild, his instincts unchained, his bond broken. The golden fields swayed gently, as if mourning with him. Thomas closed his eyes, clutching the collar, knowing that love had been real, but love had lost. In the end, all that remained was silence, blood, and memory. The price of trying to hold the wild inside a fragile human home.